So describe the home front in America during World War II. Within your response, explain propaganda, rationing, the War Production Board, and how private businesses in the U.S. transition for the war effort. All right, so this is what we talked about yesterday. Also, the assignment due tomorrow. The easy one. Propaganda piece.
Thought we were. No, give me that
You're not
back.
actually supposed to have this.
Actually, yeah.
I can't. Damn what? What is this? Ben, it's way late. Where was he yesterday? I think I told everybody it was gonna happen. Hold on, but study for your test for Tuesday next week. Great. Now on YouTube. All right, so again, guys, late assignments, forget it. Forget it. Over it. I know it's fourth market period, but I've been real lenient with a lot of you all year. So I'm not gonna accept any more late work. Anyway, for Tuesday of next week, we have our math quiz, civic math. And there will be a few questions leading up to this point. So, with the causes of World War II, okay, and obviously America's involvement. So there will be questions on that test for Tuesday. Okay? Good job, good job. One pound of weight's in there. Good. For the MVP yesterday, softball out at gym. Were you? Saw Madison miss a easy out. Just missed the ball at third base.
Yeah, was that him? It was a few.
I think it was Calvin, yeah. Yeah, that was your inside the Parker. I don't believe it. If that was the case, if you were swinging, we'd be still swinging out there. Oh, strike. I don't believe it.
I'm serious, I did.
I want to see you run around the bases. Yeah, I want to see this.
I did, I swear.
All right. I'll race you around the bases. How about that? Deal? All right. What are we putting down on it? Nothing. Why not?
I don't think it was funny.
Yeah. Chloe, where are you?
Well, you're gonna have to stop by the office.
Oh. Hey, if you're gonna do that, just check in first, okay? Just so I know you're here. Luna covered for you, but all right, okay.
Thanks.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Hey, keep working. I want to hear a little bit about I don't know, Rosie the Riveter. Someone can tell me about her. Yeah, good. I hope so. All right, here we go. The American home front. What does home front mean, Jenna? What does home front mean?
Is that like the people that are like that in America?
Okay, yeah, during the war. Good. I like it. Good. It's pretty good. All right, so the American home front, what else do we know about it? Right, what else do we know? So when it comes to use of propaganda, rationing, war production board, all this here that I listed. What do we know about this in order to try to get us ramped up for the war effort? Jason, go ahead. Thank you. Okay.
We're saving ration.
Nice.
And the war production will have businesses transition to more supply, that's regular goods.
Awesome. Good job, Jason. That's really good. Really good. All right, Rosie the Riveter, you mentioned her. Who's that, Madison?
Supposed to that influence women.
All right, good job. All right. A cultural icon, right? A symbol for women during World War II. Good job. Now they can fill the industries, the factories, work on the farm fields, even sew up uniforms and parachutes for the war effort. So any woman that was working in these factories, these industries, again, just preparing and helping out with the war effort at home, the home front, right? They were considered a Rosie the Riveter. Good, good. Again, this was a way to try to inspire many women to get involved, right? And there also was the WAC. What was the WAC? What was this? Huh? Someone other than Jason, thank you. Madison.
The Woman Army Corps.
Yes, good job. So Women Army Corps, good. So with that, women weren't in combative roles. They weren't like they're on the front lines or in the trenches or anything like that, but they're transitioning information back and forth with communication, right? In charge of that. Packaging food with MRE so that the soldiers would have them in the trenches or the front lines, right? They're also work as nurses to try to help aid these soldiers back up on their feet. So yeah, there's a lot to it. We also mentioned a little bit about diversity here in America, how that's our greatest asset, how we come together during events like this. Again, I talked about it yesterday. It's kind of unfortunate thing that I take an event like Pearl Harbor, and then we talked about it later in the day here, like 9/11 to unite the country, right? It's great that we do unite. It's great that we do come together, but it's unfortunate it takes events like that to happen, right? It's just be awesome and great that we could just do it all the time. Anyway, with World War II, right after Pearl Harbor, our country was shifted. We were guided to get involved. With over 16 million US citizens joining the war effort, obviously serving overseas, either in the Pacific theater or the European theater. There's a number that was alarming. Yeah, and someone had to fill these roles in the industries. So women did that. All right, propaganda. I know we mentioned a little bit about propaganda. A lot of times you get the negative, right, attachment to it. And we'll talk more about some other forms of propaganda that was used that dehumanized Japan, even Germany, right, our enemies at war. Meaning we're just trying to take the human element out of them, right? So that we don't have an issue when it comes to fighting them in combat. All right, but other forms of propaganda like Rosie the Riveter, victory gardens, when I was promoting rationing, right? A lot of this was positive. So there are forms of positive propaganda. Rationing. So when it comes to rationing, this was again a means to try to preserve as much of resources, food. When it comes to rubber on tires, right? It's a valuable resource, gas, you name it, in order to try to send it for the war effort. So again, people were given ration cards, even told in the newspapers what they couldn't even buy in the grocery stores to make sure that this was all ready to go for our soldiers to use overseas. All right, the War Production Board, we did talk about that, WPB. This is how we're shifting our factories or industries from peacetime products to wartime products, right? And a lot of these major car industries like Ford Motors, right, GM, right, they're transitioning to not just pump off cars, no, but pump out different types of planes, B-24 bombers and Mustangs, right, fighter planes. And they did so very well, right? So much so that it took how long for one B-24 to just fly off the assembly line, start to finish in one of these Ford Motor Industries assembly lines? Go ahead. An hour, right? It's unbelievable. So when you think about the United States entering this war, we weren't ready. No. Do we have all the experience? No. We only have 1 year experience in World War I. And World War II is far different, right? And when you think about just our generals, we really don't know how to combat in these two different environments just yet. Right, when it comes to sheer numbers alone, yeah, we do have a big population, but not really comparable to other countries. And at the same time, right, the only thing that's gonna get us through this is our industrial mining. Right, yeah, we are protected geographically from the rest of the world, with these two massive oceans in between us and our adversaries. But the biggest thing is our production. And that's what's gonna make us, obviously a formidable opponent and a force that the world's never seen before. All right, obviously that transitions into what we know of the United States military today. Okay, ever since Pearl Harbor, that we haven't taken a backseat to anybody when it comes to our military production, our funding, our innovation. Right, it's honestly just head and shoulders above everybody else. All right, so again, private businesses, when it comes to a capitalist economy, right, they join into this effort too. All right, here are your terms for today. Here are your terms. Oh, real quick, again, your assignment due tomorrow. So when it comes to document 1 about Rosie the Riveter, should know her. Document 2, document 3. Okay, again, some propaganda pieces here. Again, not all negative, some positive to promote, right, the war at home. Right, again, bonds. We talked a little bit about bonds in World War I. Same thing here in World War II. That investment into the government to help produce this large military. Anyway, now we're going to shift here to the Pacific Theater. Talk a little bit about some of these main figures. Okay, certain events that leads to. Well, at first, the United States just, well, taking a lick. Anyway, we'll mention about how we take this transition in and how we progress, how we eventually adapt to the environment. Let's face it, get our Pacific Fleet back in order to try to combat against the Japanese imperialism out in Southeast Asia. All right, so here are your terms. I'll give you guys some time. Like I said, Tuesday, you'll see information on this on the test. So make sure you guys look over some of these terms here, prepare for Tuesday for a quiz. All right, so with these terms here, guys, we're gonna go over them within the lesson today, but real quick, Douglas MacArthur, right? He's a 5-star general during World War II in the Pacific Theater. So whenever you think about the Pacific Theater against Japan, right, he's the one in charge. He's the one who's taking the responsibilities here in order to try to push Japan back to their borders. Okay, so Douglas MacArthur, he also served in World War One, the Great War. Obviously, World War II, where we're at right now. And then he's the Allied commander during the Korean War. So this guy has an experience. He's been in combat, experienced military general for a long, long time. Anyway, down the line, you guys will talk more about Douglas MacArthur during the Korean War when you get to the Cold War, not next year, but a year after with Mr. Shutt. But anyway, with Douglas MacArthur, he's probably one of the most well-known generals in American history, especially here during World War II. Real quick, the idea here is to push Japan back to their borders, their mainland, and it's gonna be tough to do. Right? Obviously, it's amphibious invasions, island to island, utilizing battleships, aircraft carriers to push Japan back. And the strategy is known as island hopping. Well, it sounds very simplistic, but that's not what it was called. We're an island hopper away to push Japan back to their mainland. So we'll talk more about MacArthur here today. I call him the Terminator. The Terminator. The reason for it is because one of the Terminator's famous lines is, "I'll be back." Right? You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, the Terminator? Okay. Anyway, he does say, "I shall return," but "I'll be back" just sounds cooler. And he also wears these cool sunglasses. They look like aviators. Well, we'll mention about the fall of the Philippines. So literally the next day after Pearl Harbor, Japan invades the Philippine Islands. Okay. So here's their opportunity again. Remember, our Pacific Fleet wiped out for how long? How long after Pearl Harbor, Audrina?
6 months.
6 months, right? So if you're Japan, here's your chance to try to push America out of these territories that are surrounding the island, right? Surrounding Japan. So the Philippines is that target, right? We acquired the Philippines during the Spanish-American War, right after, right? Right after we defeated Spain in 6 months, that's all it took. We took the Philippines from them. So ever since right around the early 1900s here, we've had access control of this territory. Japan wants us out, right? Our sphere of influences are running heads there. Anyway, with that, you can see here the fall of the Philippines. Japan does take it. And as MacArthur's leaving, he says, "I'll be back." And that's why I call him the Terminator, because he does come back, and we will take the Philippines back from Japan. All right, so one of the most brutal events that take place during World War II, and it happens here after the fall of the Philippines, is the Bataan Death March. All right, so the Bataan Death March, as you know, right, the United States and the Filipino troops, they surrender to the Japanese. Right, as they surrender, because they're low in resources, materials, okay, a lot of disease and sickness was spreading too, because the tropical environment, you can imagine, right? Malaria is one of the biggest concerns here. Dysentery, low food and low water. Again, we couldn't get our supply ships out there, so they're just kind of stuck. Anyway, over 75,000 American and Filipino troops surrender to the Japanese, and they don't treat them well at all. They marched over 65 miles in brutal conditions. You gotta think, there's over 100 degrees, right? Very humid. And again, disease, sickness spreading very rampant. And again, do you think these prisoners are gonna get fed? No, right? Any sign of weakness that they showed, the Japanese jumped on it too. And so meaning that they would kill anybody that fell to their feet and didn't get back up, right? The part of their Bushido code, right? The Japanese Bushido code is just known as their warriors code, their samurai code. And if anybody showed weakness, well, they won't live to tell the tale, right? How did they try to make example of American troops that, let's say, showed weakness here, that fell to their feet? Well, a lot of times they stab them with bayonets and try to show the rest of the group that we got to keep moving, right? They got to keep moving these troops to these prison camps here in the Philippines on the Bataan Peninsula. Anyway, they marched 65 miles, and you can imagine there's a lot of dead. Right, the Japanese didn't realize that there would be this many prisoners, right? They didn't think that they'd take the island that quick, but they did. And again, that's no excuse for how they treated the American and Filipino troops. So through extreme starvation, exhaustion, right? And dehydration, many of the American troops just died on their trip, this Bataan Death March. So we'll talk more about that here in the lesson today. But the Bushido Code, again, is the Japanese samurai code, right? Their warrior's code. You show weakness, well, you're dead, right? You'll fight to the very end. There's no surrender. And we'll mention about it when we get further into war with kamikaze pilots, right? When we talk a little bit about how the Japanese, towards the end of the conflict, they were risking it all, literally, as they were trying to stop the United States from pushing Japan back to the mainland. Right, so a lot of these invasions, right, when you think about Iwo Jima and Okinawa, right, this will lead to us making a very tough decision. If we have to invade the mainland Japan, well, there's gonna be a lot of death, a lot of casualties. So we all know how World War II ends with the use of the atomic weapons. So in that Bushido Code, just goes to show that the Japanese aren't gonna give up, right? They're gonna fight to the very, very end. And it's about their history, their story history of this great warrior samurai culture. All right, Louis Zamperini, right? He was another Olympian, right? You guys remember talking about Jesse Owens in 1936 Olympic Games? Well, he was also in that Olympic Games. He was more of a long distance runner. And there's a great movie out there known as Unbroken. You guys ever see the movie Unbroken? It's all about him and how he was stranded out in the Pacific Ocean for many, many days, right? Obviously, it's very hot out there, right? You're isolated out in the middle of the ocean. You can only imagine what that could do to someone's mind, their psyche. And with very little food and water, he was all blistered by the time the Japanese picked him up of all, right? Of all countries. So the Japanese picked him up and they placed him in a prisoner camp for, well, the remainder of the war. And he was brutalized, he was punished, and he was tortured beyond belief. And a lot of the Japanese generals were trying to break him, and it didn't happen. So he kind of fit that Bushido code that he would just never give up, that he would never just fall down. If he fell down, he was right back up on his feet. And it's a great story. So if you guys get a chance, maybe read the book, Unbroken. There is a movie out there you guys can check out too. At times it's hard to watch, just want to give you a warning. I attached a trailer to the movie, to the video lesson today, so if you guys want to check it out, that's fine. All right, then finally, the Doolittle raid. All right, so the Doolittle raid was an attack on Tokyo, Japan, right, the capital. And this was a way for the United States after Pearl Harbor, after the fall of the Philippines, after the Bataan Death March. It's like, wow, we are taking losses left and right, right? We need to have some sort of motivation here. So they took this aircraft carrier, just one sole mission. They took one aircraft carrier out with a load of B-25 bombers. And these bombers were not designed to launch off an aircraft carrier. They just weren't. So they had to strip them down of all the weight that was on them. So many of the bombs, payload, right? And they needed to make sure they had enough fuel to target Japan and land into China, right? Friendly China. So with this attack, they targeted Tokyo, Japan, which really didn't do too much damage, but it showed Japan that we weren't giving up and we can target them at any moment, at any time. Even though that Japan is expanding out, taking the Philippines and moving out to these other Pacific islands, we're close enough to target them at any moment. So with the Doolittle raids, it didn't do too much physical damage, but again, this was targeting their mainland, right? Targeting their capital and showing that this is going to be the start. From here on out, right, we're going to launch these attacks on Japan and destroy a lot of their major cities. All right, so we'll talk about the Doolittle right here today too. All right, here we go. So, like I mentioned, after Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, Japan now has an opportunity, right? Here's their chance to try to claim a lot of these territories, a lot of these islands, these lands that are very close by and that have been controlled by the United States for, well, a long time, ever since the 1900s, right? Early 1900s. So this is about 40 years or so that the United States has occupied the Philippine Islands. And look how close it is. I know it might be tough, but here's the Philippines, here's Japan. So it's very, very close, right? Obviously for us, our whole Pacific fleet, out for 6 months. It's going to be tough to get any type of supplies, resources, reinforcements out there to try to protect the island. So again, for Japan, here is your opportunity. So literally the next day, right, as we declare war on Japan, December 8th, right, they launched this attack to take the Philippine Islands. And they do, right? So in other words, they just overwhelmed us, right? We didn't have the reinforcements there. We didn't have the supplies to defend the island. Again, Pearl Harbor was a surprise attack, so it's not like we were prepared for this type of action, right? This type of invasion from the Japanese. So as they take this mainland, well, we had a lot of POWs, being prisoners of war, right? There's a POW flag right over here. I don't know if you guys ever noticed this black flag over here on the cabinet doors. So whenever you see that flag, it's the prisoner of war flag and missing in action flag. So that's what that means. A lot of times you might see them at certain legions, right, at certain places. All right, so with that, again, Douglas MacArthur, he's a state general we'll be talking about for the remainder of the war. And again, he served in World War I, where he got a lot of his experience. Then World War II, he's this famous general in charge of the whole Pacific theater against Japan and trying to island hop our way and push Japan back to the mainland. And as he's getting pushed out of the Philippines, again, it's inevitable, right? The Japanese were just well prepared for it. They had way more resources here in this neck of the woods, so to speak, than us. And as they take the Philippines, he leaves to, well, the only land we have left, the Allies, in Southeast Asia. Does anybody know what that land is? A land down under. What is it? Jason. Australia. So he flees to Australia. Now, we'll talk about tomorrow, another battle here, which was pretty much protecting Australia from the Japanese advancement. We'll talk about the Battle of Coral Sea, okay? So tomorrow we'll mention about that. That's going to be the turning point for Pacific Theater. All right, anyway, so with that, as they take the Philippines, MacArthur, that's why I call him the Terminator, says, I'll be back, right? I'll be back. And he does come back eventually, but it takes 4 long years to do so. Right? It doesn't happen until 1945, right? Until the United States will regain the Philippine Islands. So what happened? Well, the Japanese, with their Bushido code, their warrior code, right? They would really pick on, and I mean abuse and torture and kill many of these POWs of the United States and the Filipino troops and soldiers. So for about 5 to 10 days, depending on where the prison camps were located, right, they forced these American POWs and Filipino POWs to these prison camps. So 5 to 10 days marching over 65 miles, right, in this tropical, humid environment. So many of the troops obviously dying of starvation, dying of dehydration, dying of exhaustion. And every time they fell to the ground, the Japanese wanted to try to make an example to the rest of the crew. Like, hey, we got to keep moving. If not, well, we're going to be killed. So a lot of times they would bayonet a lot of this, the American POWs that would fall to the ground. So there'd be, again, a few Japanese soldiers that would use their bayonets to stab them. They'd also use samurai swords to decapitate, cut off the heads of many of the American POWs. So it was brutal. It was awful. And a lot of times too, they use their samurai swords to try to guide the POWs and just whack them into, right, the soldiers as they're walking these far distances. These things are razor sharp. So even if it hits your arm, your leg, right, it's going to make a huge cut, sometimes even lopping off limbs. They also too, they took prizes, I guess they would call them, right? They take these jewels and ways from the United States soldiers. So if they graduated from West Point, an officer, right? They would cut off their finger. They won't just take the ring off their finger. They get a graduation ring, right? They just won't take the ring right off. They would just cut right off their hand. A lot of times, again, not just your finger, your whole hand in order to take that ring off. They used it, they collected them as like prizes. So this was, again, brutal movements. Right, I'm going to show you guys a video tomorrow at the starting class, just a little bit about the Bataan Death March and American veteran that was involved in it and his experience, which that'll just summarize a little bit better for you guys. But after this brutal event, well, again, the Japanese were just taking wins and wins and wins. And in doing so, the mistreatment, the torture of many American soldiers. Again, it was brutal, it was awful. And as these reports get back to the United States, you got to imagine we're not going to just sit and idle by, right? We're just kind of waiting to get back up on our feet after Pearl Harbor in order to send our military across the Pacific and smack them around a bit. So by 1942, early, very early, right, the Japanese collected Philippine Islands. All right, so what's next? Well, we need to get a win somehow. So after Pearl Harbor, after the fall of the Philippines, after the horror stories of the Bataan Death March. Okay, and listen, those American prisoners and Filipinos prisoners, they won't be released until 1945, until we take the Philippines back. So this is like 3-4 long years of Americans being literally held captive there in the Philippines with very little food and very little water. All right, I'll show you guys pictures later in the war here as we're talking about these American troops who were starving literally to death. They looked like they went through a concentration camp because they did, right? It was brutal. And they had to show strength the whole way. The Japanese would just kill you right on the spot if you showed weakness. All right, again, like I said, the United States needed to get some sort of motivation, right? Some sort of momentum. And this is how they did it with the Doolittle raids. Did it cause a lot of damage? No, it didn't. But this was more of a psychological blow to the Japanese. That even though they knocked us down, they really did, right? We're just not going to sit by. We're not going to sit on the bench here. We're going to actually come back out and strike and punch them, right? So what did they do? So they planned for about a few months here in order to try to target the mainland of Japan with a few B-25 bombers, okay? These B-25 bombers, 16 of them, right? They're sent off the USS Hornet, right? We only had a few aircraft carriers, that was it, right? We only had like 3 aircraft carriers, and this was one of them. The goal here is to try to get as close to the mainland as possible, within about 400 miles or so to the mainland of Japan. That's where we can obviously fly out the aircraft carrier, drop the bombs on Tokyo, the capital of Japan, and make it across the Sea of China, right, to China, or the Soviet Union, one of the two, right? Because those, at that time, they were friendly to us. Anyway, as we got close to about about 600 miles off the coast of Japan, they saw a fishing vessel. They didn't know if it was a reconnaissance vessel or not, but they said, listen, we got to either do it or not. And Doolittle said, we would like to get to 400 miles because that's where we safely make this mission here and drop these bombs on Japan and make it to China, but got to do what we can. So about 600 miles away from the mainland, they decided to set off for this mission. Right, again, these planes, they weren't suited to just fly off an aircraft carrier. So they had to take a lot of the weapons off. So these heavy machine guns, well, they had to go. So what does that mean? Do you have any defenses then? If, let's say, the Japanese would send these fighter planes out? No, they don't. So they loaded up with a few bombs that they could get on. Anyway, there's a lot of talks about how they just launched off of the aircraft carrier. And James Doolittle, he was the first to go because he's the leader of the squad here. So as he's going, he has the least amount of run room here, right? Because he's the first one to go off. All the planes are stacked on the deck. So as he goes off, there's reports that he just went down, and they're like, did he just fly off the end? And then he just pulls back up. So you can kind of see it dips into the water and comes back up because it didn't have a lot of run room. These planes weren't suited for this. Anyway, they do set off 600 miles away though. And as they make their mission, they drop the bombs on Tokyo. So as they drop the bombs on Tokyo, they cause a lot of damage. But this is the first time here that we can strike, that we can hit them. Again, that's like a country, let's say, dropping bombs on Washington, D.C. It'd be a psychological impact to us. Anyway, real quick, not everybody made it back. So you can imagine some of the airplanes were destroyed, targeted by Japanese flight, right? Defenseless. Some landed in China and Japanese occupation of China. They captured them, tortured them, and killed them, right? So not everybody made it back. All right, guys. See you later. Have a good one. Take care.